Hi, my name is Vanessa. I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date's October 8th, 2017. And today I just want to take you through a little bit about the third step. This is a step that changed my life and actually got me really committed to doing the rest of the 12 steps. I'm going to read a little bit about an adaptation from the big book, and let you know that I still read this to myself sometimes when I'm feeling particularly chaotic, because I just need the reminder sometimes. I have found that when people are really struggling with drinking or their relationship with alcohol, they're having a really hard time facing the reality of their situation. And I know because I experienced this, right? So when I was drinking, and people would say, do you think it's the alcohol? Do you think if you stop drinking, This really started to put these thoughts in my mind that maybe my life kept falling apart over and over and over again because I was intoxicated, just walking through life, ruining sweet relationships, losing the trust of bosses and parents and siblings, family, friends, partners, just coworkers, and I was just sitting there really begrudgingly judging them, wondering why nobody would trust me and why people kept talking to me like I was an infant, and questioning my decisions. And it's like, oh, maybe it's because I was drunk driving for 10 years. So did that have anything to do with it? And maybe, I don't know. And just getting myself into terrible relationships, getting myself into always picking the wrong guy. And I think that that's just hitting me a lot lately because a couple of memories that I had around this time of the year, almost 10 years ago, I made a decision that changed my life, but I always wonder if I made a good decision or a bad decision, and it doesn't matter. I am where I am now. But all of that to say, jobs that I quit or walked out on, just bad decisions that I've made. And at the time, I just couldn't see that it was because I was so influenced by not just the actual physical alcohol being in my system, by this obsession, though, around it, and my obsession to justify continuing to drink. And something about when I am so caught up in just trying to justify one decision, is that now I'm constantly in defense mode around that one decision. So it's like, it wasn't just the alcohol either. I just need to emphasize that. It was all of my decisions around the decisions that I was making. So it's like, I was incredibly self-centered. It didn't appear that way. And that's kind of what I want to read to you. It didn't appear that way. In a lot of ways, people still considered me their friend. I was a shit friend. I was not a good friend. People still considered me their girlfriend. I was a shitty girlfriend. Oh my God. Could not give a shit about how I was hurting people. Forget about being a daughter, forget about being a sister. It was just I was a nightmare in so many ways. And people from around that time who are still in my life would say, you weren't that bad. And it's like, the worst betrayal was what I was telling myself about myself during that time. And even though it was a lot of selfishness and I kept prioritizing myself and my needs, I wasn't really. I was looking for the short-term fix always. I was justifying, really defensive over my bad decisions. I was not open to possibly considering that maybe there was another way to live that didn't include me chugging pop-up at 3 a.m. You know what I mean? So I wanted to read about step 3, though, because step 3, the third step, is actually, we decided to turn our will and our life over to God, and as we understood him. And in the second step, we basically just established that we consider that there might be the possibility of a higher power. We don't know what that is. We don't know anything like that, but we believe that there's a higher power out there, and we'll call it God, that cares about us and loves us and wants a personal relationship with us. And if you still struggle with the God concept, there are a lot of cool other names for it. Creator of the universe, consciousness. You can call it consciousness. You can call it your higher self. I'm going to call it God because that's what I call it. And in my experience, when I've made this decision, when I explain it to sponsees, it's like you're kind of giving over your own self-defeating ways of trying to wrangle certain results from life and instead aligning yourself to this greater picture of where you fit into the world. And that is with intentions of being loving and unselfish, pure, and honest. I always forget that. So I want to read to you what, and again, I struggled a lot to get sober. I was in a lot of delusion, you guys. Even after 3 DUIs, I thought that I could still drink. And it was a nightmare. I was not happy. I was also in this delusion that I enjoyed drinking, which I didn't. I didn't like who I became when I was drinking. I liked the short-term effect that I got, that ease and comfort that I got from the initial drink of having that alcohol in my blood. And then from there, it was all bets were off. I didn't have any control over what was going to happen after I had alcohol in my system. And even if I could, even for those times that I could control it, I was still making decisions that I wouldn't want a future Vanessa to have to clean up later, And I had a lot of ego hidden underneath that too, namely like, oh, well, I meant to do that. Or of course I wanted to sleep with that guy. Or of course I meant to quit that job. And I could build all these defenses around it and really try to sell you this story. But I know in retrospect that I just look like an idiot. And it's because I was a drunk. So not that drunks are idiots, but clearly not running on all cylinders, right? And so I wanted to read something because when I finally got kind of scared and realized that even after all these consequences kept happening and happening and happening, and I was just so defeated, even after I was in the program for a year and a half, and I still kept relapsing. That's when I started to get kind of scared, because also my friend had passed away. And I was like, oh, like people do die from this, it turns out. Even just alcoholism, just alcoholism, especially women are more susceptible to dying from alcoholism. So I was like, oh, maybe I actually do need to take this seriously. Maybe I should just give myself a shot to do something differently. And you have to remember, I was making that decision based off of a limited amount of self-love. I didn't have any respect for myself. I didn't have any respect for other people. I was afraid of other people. I wanted to please other people. I wanted other people to think I was likable. I wanted other people to think that I had my shit together, but I couldn't pull it off. And even if externally it appeared like I could because I had a car and a job and a relationship or loving parents, internally, if you wouldn't want to get a rope around my neck because I'd be lights out. I'd be done. I was not into the life that I was living. I was not experiencing joy, even though it came off like I was, towards the end, I couldn't fake it anymore. I was just showing up like a blob at meetings, and that was fun. So I wanted to read the thing that actually kind of started to click for me. It's an adaptation from a couple of pages in the big book, pages 60 to 61. And it's adapted into first person, so I'm going to read it in first person because this is really, and the assignment was to read it once a day out loud, and you're supposed to read it to a person. I think I read it to somebody like twice, and it was someone not in the program. I think it was a coworker or something, and I was like, why did I decide to do this? So anyway, just read it out loud if you need to. I'm going to read it out loud for you because sometimes when things are getting extremely chaotic, it's and not everything's fine over here, by the way. I just like to remember that this is what is happening. Okay. So the first requirement for step 3 is that I be convinced that my life run on self-will can hardly be a success. On that basis, I am almost always in collision with something or somebody, even though my motives are good. I try to live by self-propulsion. I am like an actor who wants to run the whole show. I am forever trying to arrange the lights, the ballet, the scenery, and the rest of the players in my own way. If my arrangements would only stay put, if only people would do as I wished, the show would be great. Everybody, including myself, would be pleased. Life would be wonderful. In trying to make these arrangements, I may sometimes be quite virtuous. I may be kind, considerate, patient, generous, even modest and self-sacrificing. On the other hand, I may be mean, egotistical, selfish, and dishonest. But as with most humans, I am more likely to have varied traits. And what usually happens? The show doesn't come off very well. I begin to think that life doesn't treat me right. I decide to exert myself more. I become, on the next occasion, still more demanding or gracious as the case may be. Still, the play does not suit me. Admitting I may be somewhat at fault, I am sure that other people are more to blame. I become angry, indignant, self-pitying. What is my basic trouble? Am I not really a self-seeker even when trying to be kind? Am I not a victim of the delusion that I can wrest satisfaction and happiness out of this world if I only manage well? Is it not evident to all the rest of the players that these are the things that I want? And do not my actions make each of them wish to retaliate, snatching all they can get out of the show? Am I not, even in my best moments, a producer of confusion rather than harmony? This next section is a little rough, but I still read it because it still resonates. I am self-centered, egocentric, as people like to call it nowadays. I am like the retired businessman who lolls in the Florida sunshine in the winter, complaining of the sad state of the nation, the minister who sighs over the sins of the 20th century, politicians and reformers who are sure all would be utopia if the rest of the world would only behave, the outlaw safecracker who thinks society has wronged him, and the alcoholic who has lost all and is locked up. Whatever my protestations, am I not concerned with myself, my resentments, and my self-pity? Selfishness, self-centeredness, that I think is the root of my troubles, driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity. I step on the toes of my fellows and they retaliate. Sometimes they hurt me, seemingly without provocation, but I invariably find that at some time in the past, I have made decisions based on self, which later placed me in a position to be hurt. That is so important, you guys. Every single time now, I'm sorry if you can hear the ambulance. Every single time I'm like, why does this suck right now? Why am I in this situation? This is you. And by the way, this does not like relieve other people of their responsibility. Clearly, people hurt us. But then there's also this thing of like, oh, but I put myself in this position to be hurt, actually. And it was through intentions that were not completely pure. They were all motivated by self or by fear or by trying to control a situation. So I can give you an example of this in a little bit. So my troubles, I think, are basically of my own making. They arise out of myself, and I am an extreme example of self-will run riot, though I don't usually think so. Above everything, I, as an alcoholic, must be rid of this selfishness. I must, or it will kill me. God makes that possible, and there often seems no way of entirely getting rid of self without his aid. I had moral and philosophical convictions galore, but I could not live up to them even though I would have liked to. Neither could I reduce my self-centeredness much by wishing or trying on my own power. I have to have God's help. This is the how and the why of it. First of all, I have to quit playing God. It didn't work. Next, I will decide that hereafter in this drama of life, God is going to be my director. He is the principal, I am his agent. He is the father, and I am his child. Most good ideas are simple, and this concept was the keystone of the new and triumphant arch through which I will pass to freedom. That's very loud. I don't know if you can hear that outside. When I sincerely took such a position, all sorts of remarkable things followed. I have a new employer. Being all powerful, he will provide what I need. If I keep close to him and perform his work well, established on such footing, I'll become less and less interested in myself, my little plans and designs. More and more, I will become interested in seeing what I can contribute to life. As I feel new power flow in, as I enjoy peace of mind, as I discover I can face life successfully, as I become conscious of his presence, I begin to lose my fear of today, tomorrow, or the hereafter. I will be reborn. Like, what a beautiful promise. I'm going to lose fear. Amazing. And I found that to be absolutely true, actually. So I'm now at step 3. I say to my maker, as I understand it, God, I offer myself to you to build with me and to do with me as you will. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do your will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help. With your power, your love, and your way of life, may I do your will always. I thought, well, before taking this step, before making sure I was ready, that I could at last abandon myself utterly to God. And so then it goes on to give some more instructions. So I found that extremely, and we do this in partnership with somebody. So anytime that when we actually take a third step, that means that I like to make it kind of ceremonial. I'll actually meet sponsees. I do a lot of my sponsorship through Zoom, but I will meet with sponsees in person and take this step with them. One, it's a good reminder for me to this commitment that I've made. It's the only commitment that I've made and really done really well with, I think, where I have relinquished control of my life over to God. And when I get the hints that I need to do this or go there or change jobs or stop talking to this person or do this, and I get that hit, that download, that holy intuition, even if you want to say, call it that, that is when I go, okay, I don't understand why I'm feeling this way. It's definitely not what I want sometimes. And that's how I know it's of God and not of me. But I do know that it does feel like it's going to be the more peaceful decision. That is what that means. That goes for good and bad things, anytime that I have good things come through, I know that that's from God, right? If I've been in alignment, if I didn't have to lie, cheat, and steal for it. And if something bad happens, maybe it's just a redirection to get me back on track with something that I'm supposed to be doing, right? Something that is better aligned. The whole thing being that, like, in this section, I'm acknowledging that in the past, I have tried to manipulate and like wrestle situations into what I think that they need to be, including in my relationships with other people. And the fact that alcoholics and addicts are and probably sociopaths and narcissists, if you want to use that word, which, by the way, I think that all addicts and alcoholics in active addiction are narcissists. Because looking back now that I look at all this like trending narcissist TikToks and crap, well, anything that I see about narcissism, I'm like, I did all of this in my addiction. I was not giving a shit about anybody. Anybody in active addiction who thinks that they are not a narcissist is in way more delusion than they know. But that kind of all went away after I actually committed to doing the work. And especially once I had to go back and make some amends. It's like, oh yeah, probably don't do that again. So there's that. But this idea of like trying to live by self-propulsion, that propulsion is typically fear. Just imagine like strapping on like a jetpack and the fuel is fear and just zipping around. And that's how I'm going from place to place, relationship to relationship, decision to decision, job to job, family member to family member, just making decisions based on fear. And it's like, oh, and then all these people are going to retaliate against me, or maybe they're going to be like putting up boundaries, or maybe they're going to be like, not this time, Vanessa, or they're going to be like, why would you do that? And trying to hold me accountable for my poorly executed ideas. And I'm going to be like, well, you didn't live up to your ideals. An example of this I was just telling a friend about is, when I was going through my griefiest time, I got really, I'm trying to think of the word. I got really entrenched in the comedy community here in San Diego. And by the way, I don't want to like single out San Diego comedy scene. I think that probably any performance-based type of community I would experience something similar. So I don't want to, comics are good people too, but this is what my experience was. I got really entrenched in it. And I began to kind of like create the social media account to kind of document the scene. And it was very positive, actually. I'm pretty proud of what I had created. But what I had done was create a distraction from myself and my grief. And I knew that, one, comedy, right? Like, it's going to make you laugh. You're going to have a good time going to it. But two, I knew that this demographic was not going to ask me how my day was and actually care. And because I was in such, I didn't drink. I was in a lot of emotional pain. And I mean, the thought of drinking didn't even cross my mind, but I knew that I needed to do something to keep myself distracted from myself because the pain was too much. And I ended up, just kind of going religiously to comedy shows, like several times a week. Sometimes multiple shows a night. Like I was, of course, an addict for shows, like I was everything else. And I found it great that I could just sit in the back of a dark room, and nobody would talk to me. Unfortunately, then I started to kind of get some attention in the comics and like club owners and, show producers and stuff. And, they're great people. I love them, but there's something I could count on is that they wouldn't actually care about me. They wouldn't care about me in any legitimate way that would make me feel like I had to be vulnerable, because I could not deal with vulnerability at that time. If I was being vulnerable, it was more of holding space for someone else's vulnerability. And there's a lot of addiction and mental health issues in the comedy, much like in any of the art industries, unfortunately. And so it was great. Just people would vent to me, and people would take my time and take my advice. They would take my, energy that I barely had to even wake up and shower and feed myself. And they would take and take and take and take, and my phone was constantly ringing, constantly getting notifications, constantly people wanting things from me to put them on the page and all this stuff. And it was more towards like, and at the beginning that was perfect. That was great for me because it was all a distraction from my feelings and the deaths that I was experiencing, and my lack of relationship with God at that time. And it was all a really good way for me to feel in control of what I was doing and to feel needed in a really superficial way. Unfortunately, when I kind of began to be like, okay, like it's been a year and a half, like I need to wake up from this. And I can't really say what happened, except that I kind of know like in March of 2023, I started feeling like, okay, I need to start facing some of this now. All of that community started to really rub me the wrong way. I began to see how taken for granted I was, how um, disrespected I was, how misunderstood, and like the lack of willingness to be understood, how much I was taken advantage of, and how little I was being considered. Um, there was no consideration for my feelings, which, if you recall from a minute ago when I started the story, was the exact reason why I engaged in this community, because nobody was considering me. I could just hang out in the back and be ignored, and I still get some laughs in. Perfect. But now when I start my healing, I'm like, wait, why isn't anyone caring why I'm crying for the fifth day in a row? Or how I just lost 15 pounds in 2 months. Like, why isn't anybody asking? And my hair is falling out. Like, I got really like interested and like, oh, and then but then by that point I had already set a precedent where people were asking and asking and asking things of me. And I remember trying to take a break at that time, but then my ego got involved, and I was like, well, clearly these people need me. It's like, they don't need me. And but at the time I had convinced myself that they kind of needed me. And I was like, oh, all of a sudden, like nobody is calling. Oh, this feels very lonely. And then which almost burrowed me even more into like resentment, because I'm like, wow, I could just disappear and nobody's caring. And again, all that I did was show people how to treat me. Like I was disposable, or only there for their convenience, or only there for their benefit. Like there was no two-way relationship with this community, unfortunately. And it's because I never set the expectation that there should be, right? Like from the get-go, I was just there to serve them in this very one-way relationship type of thing. And then when I realized like, oh, I actually do need support, then that's kind of when I really had to step away, and I just permanently stepped away from it. Um, now because I'm like, oh, these are not the kind of relationships that I want, actually. I actually, in my sober and healed mind, do not appreciate superficial one-way relationships. I have way more respect for myself than that. And I expect a certain level uh of a reciprocal some care, right? And like genuine interest and not just like, what can I get from you? Now, do I look back at any of those people and go like, oh, they're just selfish assholes, narcissists, blah, blah, blah. And like, no, not really. Because one, I think that if I went back to any of those people and like set better boundaries, like maybe some of those relationships could be saved. For the majority of it, I've really just stepped back. Like, I know that I'm not going to get the actually, I just think I'm not interested in getting the relationships that I know fulfill me from that community. I have my core group of friends who have been through all the ups and downs with me over the last what is that, 16, 8 years, and they know all my deepest secrets. They know everything all the time, always. I've been in a group chat with them forever. And, you know, I have my sister, I have some of my best friends that have known me since before became really chaotic in alcoholism. And it's like, oh, these are the friendships that actually nurture me. But when I look back at this, I go, was I quite virtuous? Was I weaponizing my kindness? Absolutely. Was I being considerate, patient, and generous? Yeah, but it was all with self-serving motives to have this need met of being not seen and then not being seen and then getting mad about it, right? Or being disappointed about it. So it is very interesting that addicts and alcoholics really do have this capability to have these blinders in place where we are consistently putting ourselves in positions to be hurt and then like being really surprised when we end up being hurt. And also, it's extremely powerful to know that because it's like, oh, if all of these problems are just in my own making, then I could just start making different decisions and avoid these situations. And it's extremely liberating. Like, there's a lot of freedom in there. People get really turned off by AA because they think like, I'm not going to admit that I'm powerless. And it's like, no, you do have power. You have a tremendous amount of power. With that power comes a tremendous amount of accountability. I think people don't want accountability, and that's why they get turned off by AA. And I don't blame them. You have to have a certain amount of courage and faith that things are going to work out in order to take accountability. You have to be willing to remove certain parts of your ego that are not benefiting you in order to want to be accountable. I was listening to this podcast today with Duncan Trussell, and he said this really beautiful thing about heartbreak. And I think that it resonated for me because this is in all relationships that we can experience. It's like when you love, Mark Houston says this too, like when you love somebody, in order for me to be like aligned with like God's will, I need to be ready and open and available to love everyone. And I really do try to practice this in my daily life. Like, can I look at somebody just as they are? They don't have to change, and I love them, and you don't even have to love me back, but I can love you. This is the same with the comedy community. Looking back, I still love them. I have so much respect for what they do and it's like their art and comedy. And I'm so grateful for all the times that they made me laugh. I love them. I love it as a community and I love them individually. So there's that. You don't have to do anything. I just love them. I have so much love for them, right? And then heartbreak comes when our ego gets involved. So our ego starts to set. It's like we have this nice, big, soft, mushy heart. And then we cover it like with this protective shell of ego. And it's like, as soon as ego gets involved, like I felt like I had, like, well, I give them everything. Why don't they give me something back? Or, I look at somebody and I go, well, I'm loving them. Why don't they love me? Or I love this person, so surely they're going to help me out, right? It's like something like that. Or I love this person. Why aren't they acting the way that I want them to act? if they really love me, they would act this way, right? Whenever those kinds of demands start being made on love, that's where heartbreak is really, that's where heartbreak gets involved. Because the moment that person stops acting that way, or they don't respond the way that you want them to, that's when your ego starts to crack. And it's like, why am I not enough? Why couldn't they do this? Why couldn't they be that? And we take that on personally, as far as like, oh, this is painful, because now we're experiencing a type of death in our identity and who we thought we were in this love, which was, it turns out, not complete love. If we think that people need to be a certain way, right? And that's where heartbreak happens. It's this detachment of this love being broken by this ego that is somehow trying to protect that love. So again, it's really interesting to, and extremely empowering for me to know that, like, oh, cool. So something sucks, and I can see that, like, yeah, I probably didn't have the best of intentions in this situation, or whatever it is, right? Or I wasn't as honest as I should have been, or whatever, you know? So yeah, was I not a victim of delusion that I can just wrestle satisfaction and happiness out of this if only I managed well? Absolutely. Okay, I need to take my dog out before we go to bed, but I love you guys. I hope you got something out of this. I'm sorry this was so much longer than I anticipated. If you did get something, I don't know, leave me like a little heart or something, comment. Okay, I love you. Bye.